So first, I want to say hello and welcome. Today's session is NTD data feedback for subrecipients, including rural reporters, states, and group plan supporters. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. We are pleased to have Tom Coleman and Michael Kay as our presenters instructors today. Tom Coleman is the Federal Transit Administration's National Transit Database Program Manager based in Washington, D.C. He has over 10 years of experience working for multiple federal agencies and D.C.'s Department of Transportation before joining FTA. One of his focus areas, and the focus of today's webinar, is to improve the value and usefulness of NTD data to the transit community. Michael Kay is a transportation planner with the US DOT Volpe Center based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Michael joined the Volpe Center in 2007 and supports various offices in the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Railroad Administration in addition to FTA. Michael has previously facilitated FTA focus groups at the annual TAM Multimodal Roundtable and the Transportation Research Board annual meeting. So for today's presentation, please know that you can ask a question at any time. We request that you do this in the Q&A box. It's a dedicated question and answer box so that your questions will all be in one place. Most likely the button to toggle on the Q&A box is probably at the bottom of your screen, but it's definitely on your Zoom control toolbar. The chat box and the Q&A box look similar, and the chat box is available. However, we don't want to lose your question in the chat box if it disappears in the scroll. So please use the dedicated Q&A box for your questions. I will be hanging in the background. If anyone needs anything, you can chat me, and I will also put my email address in there so you can contact me if you need anything or, want to say hi to NTI. I think that does it for my housekeeping, and now I will turn the presentation over to Tom and Michael.
Thank you so much, Lori. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining for today's webinar. As Lori indicated, my name is Tom Coleman, and I'm FTA's NTD Program Manager. I'm joined today by Michael Kay, and we'll be switching off presenting slides. Next slide. First, I'd like to say welcome and thank you for joining. Today's webinar objectives are to gather stakeholder feedback on existing uses of NTD data from people such as yourselves, identifying user needs for future NTD data products, and our intended audiences are large transit operators, small transit operators, small urban and tribal reporters, and the last focuses on today's webinar, state subrecipients and asset-owner reporters, group plan sponsors. We have a good turnout. More than 50 of you signed up for the event today and representing more than 30 states. So good nationwide representation. Last, today's webinar assumes some prior knowledge of NTD data. And if you need more information for sure about the NTD, NTI has that information on its website. Next slide. Now the legalese disclaimer. The contents of this document do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This document is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA's statutes and regulations for applicable NTD requirements. This session is also being recorded. Feedback, obviously, because it's recorded, is not anonymous on this webinar, but if you do wish to provide sort of private feedback, you can reach out to us at the email address ntdfeedback@dot.gov. This email address will remain open for the next week and receive your feedback, your private feedback. And next, I'll turn it over to my co-host Michael with some additional information about kind of how we'll be running the webinar today.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I just want to give everyone a little bit of an overview of this feedback session and the structure. Obviously, if we were in different times, I can imagine us all in some big ballroom together and executing this in person. Obviously, the times dictate that we'll have to do this virtually. So just want to kind of lay down some ground rules. This is designed as really a virtual listening session. We want to hear from you. Because there are so many of you, we're actually going to conduct that exclusively via polling and chat and using various functionalities here in our Zoom room. So I just want to orient you to those. So like I mentioned, polling, and I'll pull one up in a moment. Periodically throughout today's feedback session, we will have some polls inquiring about your familiarity with various NTD data products and so forth. We also have some sort of flexible polls if we want to, if we field any input in the chat box, for example, a useful tip or suggestion from someone, we can actually in real time create or amend some of our polls to take the temperature, take the pulse of the rest of the virtual room, if you will. So I do encourage you all to use that chat box for general feedback and for responses that are directly related to some of the open-ended questions that we pose to you. Separate from that is a Q&A box. It looks a little bit similar, but the way that gets filtered is the questions themselves come directly to myself as the moderator and to some of my colleagues here behind the scenes. So that's one way that we can communicate with you directly if you have a question, perhaps that you that's specific to your agency that doesn't bear broadcasting or more widely, or just questions in general. We'll be monitoring both of those elements. So this is only going to be as useful as is our direct engagement. So really do encourage you all to be as participatory as possible. We know that this isn't an ideal setting, and it certainly will take a little bit of time for you to pose your questions and provide some anecdotes. So we will be taking 30-second, 1-minute breaks here and there. We're happy to do so. A little bit of dead air time to give you some time to respond is quite all right. I will prompt you when I do go kind of radio silent for a couple of durations. But with that, we're going to dive in. So let me bring us to our first couple of polls, inquiring about just the demographics of our audience. Let me go ahead and launch that poll. So it should be showing up on your screen now, inquiring what is your affiliation, a government agency, a private operator, a private sector company or trade group, or other. And if you do select other, feel free to use that chat box to let us know where you're joining us from, even just categorically. I'll leave that open for another 5 seconds. And I will go ahead and close that out. So the predominance of everyone is, I'll share the results here. We'll share some of the poll results. We won't share all of them, but most of you are with government agencies. One person at the last second came in as a member of the private sector or a trade group, and one from another element, perhaps academia or elsewhere. So let me now switch to, excuse me, toggle to our second poll here. It's launching now. Question is, how many NTD related webinars have you participated in previously? If today is your first one, welcome. If you've attended one or fewer in the past year, or more than one in the past year, I'll give you 10 seconds for that. I'll go ahead and close that out, and happy to share the results. We have a really broad range of participants today, and that's great. For about a quarter of you, this is your first NTD webinar, and welcome. As Tom indicated, there are several additional resources for you to get up to speed on the NTD, and if we end up moving a little too fast for you, that's okay. Still happy to have you join us, soak it all in, and can feel free still to let us know through our polls and our questions how we can continue to make the NTD more useful for you, or useful in general. Almost half of you have participated in one or fewer in the past year, and about a third of you have attended more than one in the past year. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to move on to our agenda slide. We have 4 main topics for today. So we're scheduled for 90 minutes until 3:30 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. We'll use any or all of that time as need be. And we'll certainly leave about 15 minutes at the end for general discussion and Q&A. But we first want to talk about some of the known users and known uses of NTD data. So Tom's going to present a little bit on what we know already. And interspersed will be some, or I should say at the end will be some questions to confirm kind of your familiarity with the various products. So feel free to please do pay attention to the content, and then we're curious to know how you're utilizing the products. Then we'll look at we'll review some of the actual published data products. Then we'll pivot to talking about any existing needs that aren't being met, or looking ahead, can you anticipate any future needs? Because that is, again, the goal for today is to better understand how you're using NTD and how it can be bolstered for you in the future. And as I mentioned, we'll have the Q&A section at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you so much, Michael. So as Michael just let us know, the first topic is known users and uses of NTD data. And before we dive in further, hopefully the polling is going well. There'll be a lot of polls. But we're now going to explore kind of like, before we kind of ask you about how you use the data, just a little overview. Next slide. And just a little introduction to the NTD again, not a lot here, but just a quick summary. The NTD was created by Congress in 1974. The database houses data for financial, operating, and asset conditions of America's transit systems. It is maintained by FTA, and it includes a website providing access to data products or data files, sometimes called that, for the public. We will be discussing a sample of these data products, their uses, and future alterations to these products geared around our core stakeholders, such as yourselves. And this session is really about you and listening to what your uses are and what they could be in the future. Next slide. So to understand kind of the uses, let's start with the users that at least we know about them or have identified. Based on your polling, a lot of you are government agencies. So that's the first one here. The others are private operators, private sector companies and trade groups, and then academic. There could be others, and we know there are, but these are some of our core stakeholders, and the vast majority of government agencies, just like FTA. Next slide. And before we jump into like the specific uses, here are some broad examples of kind of how those are the users, what are the uses? We know that apportionment is one core use that is for Congress. Congress uses NTD data to apportion money for transit operators and recipients, and subrecipients too, as you are today. And so in addition to apportionment, and again, I can't really weigh in on Congress's kind of constraints or reasons why they kind of and how they use the data, but they are definitely a core, probably the most important user of NTD data. In addition to Congress, we also know we have uses around tracking service consumed data. That would be ridership. Tracking service supply data. An example would be vehicle revenue miles. Monitoring safety data such as fatalities or injuries on your transit systems. Collecting transit asset management or TAM data, and reviewing financial data. These are all uses of NTD data. Next slide. And some external uses, those are all kind of internal to FTA and other government agencies. A lot of users use it for researching the transit industry. We've gotten inquiries from media who use our data to support news articles, periodicals, other academic pieces, and then peer benchmarking. We've heard in other sessions as well. A lot of transit agencies want to research sort of what their peers and comparable agencies often are reporting to the NTD to get a sense of like what kind of rolling stock are they acquiring, or how much did their vehicle revenue miles drop during COVID. Those sorts of like peer analyses are a common theme as well. Next slide. So now let's talk about the actual data products or the data files, and to just get the very basics. Let's look at where we can find those. Next slide. Here is a snapshot from the website at the bottom of that slide, transit.gov, NTD data. And this website is really where all NTD houses all of its data products. It has toggleable features, and there's a lot of data here. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to find, even for me, but it does have a ton of data in here for multiple years and types of files or data products. And it's too many data products to cover all of them today. So we chose a few samples to go through and describe and kind of like show you some of the uses of these files that we know of to kind of get the conversation started. Next slide. One of them is the data tables. So I'm going to go through some example uses of data tables. Here you'll see the 14 data tables of the type of data product, one of which is actually a consolidated zip file from all of the files you want to download. You can actually download all 13 at once, and that's the very top left. So the second below it, 2019 vehicles, is really like the first listed data table. And I wanted to open it and kind of show you how to use it a little bit and see, provide an example of like that as a use case. Like how would I use the 2019 data table for vehicles? Next slide. When you open this data table or file, the 2019 vehicles data table, you see immediately a number of rows and the transit agency. So at the very top is NTD New York Transit. New York's a bit different than other agencies because it has multiple NTD reporters. So instead, I'll just focus on Los Angeles County Transit. Los Angeles County Transit has a number of vehicles. This file is obviously focused on vehicles. So one data point or question might be what is the count of vehicles operating at maximum service or VOMs for Los Angeles? And it's 3,469. And of those, 1,962 are buses and 383 are articulated buses. So the use of this file can be seeing the total vehicle or fleet types by transit agency, and then really the vehicle types themselves. You can see that that's at the bottom of the file itself. There's a little tab there with Microsoft Excel. It says vehicle type count by agency. And this also provides a peer comparison. So what's nice is it's sorted by size of fleet. And so these are the top ones at the top, but if you're, say, the very smallest transit agency, you go to and find your own, it's sorted so that you'll find peers in similar size around the rows that you're in. So if you're in row 400, 399 will have a little more VOMs, and 401 would have a little fewer VOMs. So CTA, SEPTA, they're all here. So that's the use, is really looking at fleet. Next slide. Here's a different tab in the same data table. Again, it provides a business intelligence kind of visualization of the data. And this is the same file, it's just a different tab. But here, this gives the distribution of age for the entire fleet of the nation's transit fleet. And so you'll see here, it kind of ranges from 0 or brand new in terms of vehicles to 60 or more years old. The mean age is around 7 or 8 years, but you can see here, it kind of there's a number of new vehicles and then also a lot in the backlog that are much older. So this gives a graphical business intelligence kind of solution if you just want to see it, the nation in a snapshot. Next slide. So moving on from vehicles, another data table, one that we commonly use is the 2019 metrics data table. It's another one of these 13. Next slide. And one use of the metrics data table is to look at, for instance, fare box recovery. So that would be operating expenses and fares received in kind of a relationship format. So here, number one, you'll see it's New York City Transit. Their fare revenues per unlimited passenger trip was $1.34, and their cost per passenger was $1.92. So their fare box recovery or fare revenue per total operating expense was 0.7 or 70%. That was for something like heavy rail, which typically has a larger fare box recovery than, say, demand response, which here shows 0.02 or 2% because it's a smaller vehicle. There's larger expenses because there are fewer passengers able to carry relative to the service. So this file gives you kind of answers to those questions around, I guess, which services have closest almost to full cost recovery for their fare boxes. And you can kind of explore differences between agencies with this file. Next slide. And the last data table I wanted to highlight with some kind of concrete use cases or questions is the funding sources data table. Next slide. we get a common question about what are the fractional shares, federal, state, and local funding. This file answers that with a graphical business intelligence answer. Here, I know it's 2019, we now have 2020 available, but just looking 1 year prior, 31% of funding sources were federal, 23% were state, and 21% were local. I find this to be a very interesting use case because we often get asked about capital funding sources and provide percent breakouts. And this is just for capital, but in terms of capital, again, it's 31% of funding sources were federal. And so this file can be used for that purpose. Michael, with that, I'll give it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. I had to come off mute there. So we just concluded the first part of the first section, and I have one poll question to pull up in just a sec. But just wanted, now that we've come to this point, I just want to kind of stop and give a reminder that as we're presenting any of this information, if you have any anecdotes to share beyond just your utility, your prior use of these products or not, the poll question will get at that. But if you've used them to any unique effect, we're looking to engender some of that discussion via the chat box and Q&A, particularly the chat box, if you care to share any anecdotes. And we'll be encouraging that throughout the focus group, the feedback session today. So I may sound like a broken record by the end, but do really welcome that interactivity as much as we can get that going despite the circumstances. So let me pull up first a poll question. I'm going to launch it, but then I'm going to take a minute to kind of walk you through it. And I'll make sure to give you a whole minute or so to respond. So the question is really, what is your level of awareness and involvement with these data products prior to today? So there's a bit of a spectrum there. The top being you were completely unfamiliar with the products, to the bottom where you are familiar with and use all of the products, and in between is a bit of a mixture of knowledge and familiarity. So I won't read out all the answers, but I'll go on mute for about 20 or 30 seconds to give you a chance to look through all the choices. Okay, 3. They're still coming in, so I'll give 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. This is an interesting one. I'm going to share the results here, and really a broad spectrum. Again, we know about 20% of you, roughly, is your first NTD webinar, and presumably there's some overlap with familiarity with the data products. But quickly it escalates to at least knowledge and in a lot of cases use of these products, and for a few of you you're using all of them, and for a majority you're using at least some of these. So this is very useful feedback, and again we'll move on so that Tom can talk a little bit about some of the non-Excel data products, but as any of this is jogging your memory of prior usage, certainly be interested in hearing a little more from anyone about how you've utilized some of these products. So with that, let me stop sharing the poll and I will turn it back to Tom.
Great, thank you, Michael. I agree, that was an interesting poll result. It's good distribution. Next, we're going to talk about a second category of data products, the NTD's non-Excel data products. And the first one of those is the National Transit Summaries and Trends, or NTST. The NTST is a PDF file. It's one of our annual data publications or products. Unlike some other products, again, there aren't many that are PDFs. It's sort of more in a report format rather than an Microsoft Excel format. The goal of the NTST is to present and summarize transit data in an easy-to-read format with a mixture of graphics and narrative interpretation, covering the public transit, sort of the entire nation's public transit system, particularly for 1 year. Its main use is visualization of data. Next slide. Here's an example of one of the graphics from the NTST. it's a year old, so it doesn't have the COVID data in it. We just released our new one, but there's a similar graphic in the NTST as well. Here you'll see it's called an exhibit 3 unlinked passenger trips time series. The scope of this kind of graphic is 1 year of transit data, but in the context of the last actually 10 years. It'll have text around it, and here is like the actual graphic. And how you read it is it provides in one place, for instance, 4.94 billion rail unlinked passenger trips occurred in 2019, and you can follow the chart over the years. It was 4.8 in 2018, all the way back to 4.58 in 2010. And as for non-rail, such as bus, that was 4.82 billion in 2019, and then all the way back 5.26. So it's interesting. It started in 2010 where non-rail kind of exceeded rail, and then they sort of converged, and rail by 2019 was a little bit ahead. And so again, the use case is a visualization that isn't presented in our other data products. So the NTST presents that in that particular way. Next slide. Another non-Excel NTD data product is our NTD Data Publications Guide. This is a separate PDF document from the rest of them. It's not part of the NTST or our Excel files. It describes how to use NTD data tables and data products, including important changes between years. It's sort of the explanation or Rosetta Stone of taking different files and trying to make them match. And the file includes a matrix of forms. It includes NTD reporter types explanations and also descriptions of different files. And so again, it's sort of like a crosswalk tool to help you. And the use I'd like to go through is reconciliation and how you can reconcile different file totals if you look between them. Next slide. So here's a snapshot from the NTD Data Publications Guide. It's showing two different data product types, the 2019 revenue sources database file and the TS or time series 1.3 funding sources data table national transit profile. And you'll see here that that's the second column. The third column shows 7.648 billion in total capital sources expended for the 2019 revenue sources database file. And the second row for the time series shows 7.644 billion. So that's a difference of 4.15 million. So what is this discrepancy? Here it explains it. There's a discrepancy not so much because they don't agree or there's some omission, but rather because one of the file includes data that the other does not. So in the revenue sources database file, that includes intercity bus subrecipients. These intercity bus subrecipients do not operate transit service, but they do receive FTA funding. So we collect limited financial forms and we report that in the database file. Whereas on the time series funding sources file, we exclude that limited data because they are not operators. And that's notated here in the last column, excludes intercity bus subrecipients. And so this, again, this data publications guide allows you to kind of crosswalk two files as they just described and potentially explains any differences you might see across totals of the two files for similar data points. Next slide. Michael, I think I'll turn it back to you.
Indeed, thanks a lot, Tom. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pull up the same poll question we asked previously, but we're going to focus it specifically on these non-Excel data products. So let me first clear out our answers. And so same poll question specific to the National Transit Summaries and Trends, or NTST, and the NTD Data Publications Guide. Are you familiar? Are you familiar with these products, and do you use them? And again, I'll give you about 20 seconds to just digest the various answer choices. I'll go on mute. Five more seconds. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so a little bit of a divergence here, a little bit less familiarity with these data products compared to our first set, but still at least a third of you are using some of them, and over half of you are at least familiar with them. So that's great information for us to know. I have a couple of other poll questions at the moment. Actually, I'm going to hold off on those as we did last time, Tom. So to the next section. So I think with that, let me just double check here. Yep. So I'm just going to turn it back to, I'm sorry, forgive me. Yes, I am turning it back to Tom to talk about the monthly data files. Let me just close this out. And Tom, back to you.
Yes. Great. Thank you, Michael. So we went through two different sort of categories of data products, and this is a third. We're closing in, and then we'll have more kind of an open forum. So this third category is the monthly data files. And here you'll see there's actually two different monthly data files, and that's a common question that we get is why do we have two on our data products website? You'll notice there's the monthly raw data release and the monthly module adjusted data release. And the difference there is the raw versus adjusted. In 99% of cases, you should use the adjusted data release. The difference is that each month, a small number of reporters do not report their monthly data on time. And the raw data release contains these gaps unfilled in. The adjusted data release contains estimates for those entities that have not reported their most recent monthly data. And so the more complete file is the adjusted file. If you didn't and you use the raw, it's not that those entities that didn't report were necessarily zero. It's really that they just, for one reason or another, may not have been able to meet the reporting deadline. Next slide. So, but how do you use? So you use the adjusted file, and like what are the uses for that? Purpose and goal of this file is to provide the most current data we can. We release most of our data on an annual frequency. The data tables, the NTST, everything I've presented so far, let's release once a year. We actually just released it. The monthly data, we actually release on a monthly basis. And the main use cases for our monthly data are to provide a current version of transit data. It answers questions like how much ridership has decreased across the country. That's a common one we get during COVID. So, you don't want to wait a year to see, for instance, has the comparable transit systems, are they decreasing? Is the ridership dropping? Are they decreasing the vehicle revenue hours or miles? How much has service decreased across the country? The monthly data set has answers to these. It's released with approximately 6 weeks of delay. So if you look today, you will see the end of September is the most recent data point. Obviously, October is also over, but they get a limited amount of time reporters do to submit. It's actually due by the end of November. We'll have the October data, and then we release that. It's on a 6-week delay. So right now we release monthly data with about a 6-week delay. Next slide. And just jumping to it. So how do you use this file? When you open up that adjusted or raw data file, hopefully it's adjusted, you can take a look both at the micro, meaning an individual agency, and the specific month and year in particular. In this screenshot, you'll see August 2021 is the most recent. Again, we have a little bit more recent than that, but that was just an example. And you can see I've actually highlighted the totals at the bottom of these columns. And the row you really want to read is the subtotal with reduced and rural reporter estimates. Only full reporters report monthly data, and reduced and rural reporters, the FTA actually estimates their sort of component of ridership to provide a full sort of, again, estimate with it's 95% actual data. And here it's 422,283,000 unlinked passenger trips or rides. So ridership in August 2021, again, 422 million, which sounds like a lot, except that actually after COVID, we have about ridership is still about 50% below where it was pre-COVID or August 2019. We actually had almost 800 million or around 800 million trips. So, and you can see both those data points and others if you go in here. The other thing, back to the micro, you can look at an individual agency. Here I'm showing Tahoe Transportation District, NTD ID N91092, and their ridership for, this is demand response, mode and type of service was 726 trips. So Tahoe Transportation District had 726 trips in August 2021. Next slide. And Michael, I think you could see how the audience uses this data.
Absolutely. So sensing a pattern here, we're going to relaunch the same poll, and this is now specific to the monthly data products. Just clear it out here. So a level of awareness and involvement with the monthly data products. I assure you there's some more diversity in the questioning coming up shortly. But this is very useful for us to better understand, again, not just whether you're familiar with some of the products, but how you're using them. So if you have used some of these data products before, and especially if you've used them for purposes other than those that Tom described, again, we'd be happy to hear from you through the chat box, through the Q&A box, if you prefer. If you have a lingering thought thereafter, do hit us up at NTD, I'm going to get in a sec, and I'm going to get it right, NTD feedback@dot.gov. Let me go ahead and close that poll out and share the results. So a bit of an in-between, the first and second one. I see a third unfamiliar, but a pretty broad spectrum from there on out, including several of you who either use all the data products or use some, or at least familiar with all the others. That's really useful for us to know. I have a couple of other polls here. So let me switch. So we talked about monthly data products. And of course, they are released each month. It's a clever name. So, and there's usually about a 6-week lag between when the month ends and when the data is reported. Does that meet your needs? Meet your agency's needs? Yes, no, or you're not sure. And if you're not sure, we'd love to know why. So we couldn't quite fit that all into a single answer choice, but for the 13 of you who aren't sure, what would be useful to know to help you be sure if it meets your needs? Let me go ahead and close that out. Actually, I'll give you five seconds before we close that out. Okay, I'm going to close that out. And interesting. That is meeting the needs for most of you. Certainly, most of you who have an opinion, who are able to formulate an opinion based on experience, and then for another half of you, you're just not sure, and it may be that you don't know enough about the data products to be able to tell. Maybe that you've tried using them before, and you haven't assessed yet whether the 6-month lag is suitable. But if you have any thoughts or can share with us any additional information on whether it's meeting your needs, we'd love to know. So I want to thank Ian for breaking the ice here a little bit. Who notes you need to start using those more before you could determine if the product's frequency meets our needs. I'm actually going to take the opportunity, not so much to pull a friend or find a friend or anything, but I do want to pick up on, we're going to try and make this more of what an actual focus group would be like, where we take someone's input and then we poll the rest of the audience. So give me a second to just pull this up. We'll have the time, so I want to make sure to get it right. I'm going to go to 19 here. And let me just pull up that chat again to remind myself. So in a second, I'm going to launch a very generic poll that's going to ask you on a sliding scale, to what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement, with the following statement. The statement being, so I only want those to answer this question who put not sure for whether the 6-week lag meets your needs. And the statement that I want you to respond to is, I'm not sure because I haven't, I need to spend more time with the monthly data products before determining if it suits my needs. So I'm wondering where people lie on that spectrum. Among those of you who weren't sure if the 6-week lag meets your needs, if you need more time with it, then you're at a 7. If it's another reason, then you're closer to a 1. I'll state it one more time. The statement being, I'm not sure if the 6-week lag meets my needs because I need more time with the products. Give you about 5 more seconds. And this is great feedback. So I'm going to show this. So this isn't, perfect assessment, but for many of you, in fact, most of you, it seems to be that having more time with the products, more familiarity with them in general would afford you the opportunity to make that assessment better. So that's great for us to know. And hopefully, if we ask this question of you in the future, we'll be able to move you on from the I'm not sure to yes or no. Maybe it's not meeting your needs, and that's fine. I certainly want to acknowledge the one person who said it's not meeting your needs. Didn't mean to skip over that. So if that one person cares to identify themselves, you're welcome to do so, or contact us separately. But curious to know, of course, why that 6-week lag may not be meeting your needs. Certainly understandable, but anything you could do to elaborate there would be helpful. I have one more poll question for the moment. Okay. So the question is, if FTA collected 1 week's worth of data each month and then used that data to estimate the remainder of the month's data, would that meet your needs? Again, if FTA were to take 1 week's worth of data per month and kind of aggregate that up roll that up for the entire month, would that information and the export of that information, would that suit your needs? 5 more seconds on this one. Still coming in. We make it 5 more. All right. You have pretty critical mass here. So interesting that that suits the needs for about 20% of you. About half of you it doesn't, and there may be many reasons for that. Actually, I'm gonna pull up that poll question and ask the no's a follow-up too, and then for 35 a third of you roughly, you're not sure. I want to focus in on those no's. I'm gonna posit that one of the key reasons why that wouldn't suit your needs is that maybe one particular week isn't particularly representative of the entire month. But that's just one possibility. So I'm going to pull up that poll again about the generic one. And I'll keep the comment simpler this time. Sorry, actually, let me just, before I share it, let me make the statement here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so for those of you who said that the 1 week's representation for the full month does not suit your needs, does it not suit your needs because that 1 week isn't necessarily representative of the whole month? So if 1 week isn't representative and that's why you said no, you're at a 7. If there's another reason why that wouldn't suit your needs, you're down closer to the 1 category. Yeah. It's interesting to see the results come in real time, but I think it's clear that is the reason for, I want to say most of you, certainly not all of you, and that I'll share this. At least half of you were really close to that threshold. Maybe the 6s there are other reasons. I imagine those of you that answer 3, 4, 5, or 6, that was one of several reasons. So, but clearly that is one of the reasons. If you have other thoughts or reasons why 1 week's data is insufficient for you, we'd love to hear from you. So that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom briefly to do a combined summary of the 3 sets of data products, and then we're going to pivot more towards looking at existing and future needs. So let me advance the slide and turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think we're considering the feedback greatly. No, there's users of the most recent ridership and other data that we have, and so yeah, getting the feedback, really listening is hopefully that's coming across, and we're trying to do that also with kind of an empirical or quantitative angle. So this is really helpful. Okay, so recapping about the 3 data products, the data tables, and I give you a vehicles example, a funding example, and also some charts there, but the data tables, that was one category of data product. Then the national transit summaries and trends, and then the finally the monthly. I guess looking at all 3 of those, we just want to kind of like, I guess, look at uses around those 3 and I guess just understand a little bit more in aggregate. So I couldn't present to you today 100 different data product types because we have just about that many data products. But with the ones that I've presented today and all these uses, I guess we're gonna just kind of like ask one or a couple more questions on that, just in aggregate on the total different sets of uses across all of the different data products together.
Yes, that is correct. So this will be the last time that you'll see a poll like this. But as Tom indicated, we're going to bring up that same poll question from before, and now this is asking just on the aggregate, on the totality of the 3 sets of data products, everything that's been presented thus far. Wondering your level of awareness and familiarity with these products. Again, everything taken on the aggregate. Give you 10 more seconds. And we'll close that out. So we have a broad distribution again. A lot of folks are falling into the realm of using some of the data products, but not all, and having either no familiarity with the others or some familiarity with the others. So great, thank you again. This is really useful feedback for us. A few additional poll questions. We're going to mix it up a little bit, just in the line of questioning. Question here is, if you have used any of the aforementioned data products, at what scale have you utilized them? And this one should allow you, I believe, to select multiple answers. So have you done an analysis on a single agency, either your own agency or another? An analysis on a small set of agencies, maybe you filtered by location or some other parameter, or have you done any analyses on all agencies? I'll leave that open for another 15 seconds, and certainly once you've submitted your answers, if you care to elaborate, perhaps if you've done analysis on a single agency, just noting if it was yours or another, or if you've done broader analyses, we'd love to hear for what purposes. Again, all of this is with an eye towards improving the NTD. So the more we know about how you're utilizing it, the more a better position we will be, and FTA will be to iterate upon the NTD and improve it. So let me end that, and I'll just note that a lot of you have done analysis on a single agency. So about 5 out of every 6 of you who have used these products. And it scales down slightly, but still, a good number of you have done broader analyses as well. So thanks again for that. A couple other poll questions here. This is specific to accessing the data products. To what extent did you know how to access these data products prior to today? So we're talking on the aggregate, the monthly data products, the non-Excel data products. To what extent did you know how to access them? Give you 5 more seconds. Just to save time, I'll just note that a good 3/4 of you fell in the middle of knowing how to access some of them. If anyone cares to offer a thought for either which ones you don't know how to access or haven't accessed, or anything that we could be doing better to improve sort of the navigation of the NTD website, certainly would welcome that feedback. Let me end that. I've got 2 more quickies here and then we'll move on. Talking about complexity, how complex are the NTD data products? The aforementioned ones, the published ones. Low end of the spectrum is not complex enough. To have it 7, the high end is too complex. We're like Goldilocks here, kind of. Well, I shouldn't tease the answers. I'll give you 10 more seconds. And 3, 2, 1.5, 1. We fell a lot in the middle there, and a few of you, a couple of you noted that they were on the more complex side. So also good feedback for us. And 1 more in this section, then we'll move on. Is the number of NTD products the appropriate number? Low end, there are too few of these NTD data products, these sort of recurring products, if you will. High end is there aren't enough. We need more. I'm sorry, high end is there are too many. Let me restate that. Low end is there too few. High end is there too many of these products. 10 more seconds. Just checking out our chat box real quick. Good, some good feedback there. Okay, I'm going to end that poll. We fell kind of in the middle there as well, leaning a little bit to the too many side, but not by much. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to move to actually more polls. This is great. I love polls, in case you can't tell. It's a great way to get broad and quick feedback from among over 50 of you joining us today. So now we're switching in topics a little bit to existing needs. Have you ever sought information from the NTD that wasn't available? Yes, no, or maybe. Maybe being that you've sought information and you couldn't find it, but you aren't convinced it's not there. It might still be there. I'm going to give just a couple seconds so we can make sure to have enough time at the end here, but I'll end that one. And about half of you actually came up with the maybe answer, and which is interesting. Curious to know where you got stuck, or what you may have tried to do by way of filtering or looking elsewhere, and perhaps why you came to the conclusion that although you couldn't find it, that you think it may still be there. We're kind of curious to know what may have been the issue, or issues. I've got a couple here. Let's see. So this is now about accessing the data and exporting. Have you ever sought information from the entity that you had trouble accessing or exporting? So this may actually get to some of those maybes in the previous question. You maybe knew it was there, couldn't extract it. FTA and Tom are going to be happy to hear that at least 3/4 of you have not had trouble accessing or exporting, but we still want to be cognizant of those quarter of you. So again, feel free to provide us that feedback. Got 2 more here, and then we'll actually move on. If applicable, select, and this is another multiple answer question. So please select reasons why NTD data has confused you in the past. Formatting issues, maybe the query yielded data or values that you didn't understand, or I'm sure there are myriad other reasons. So feel free to provide, to indicate those other reasons in the chat box. Again, the question is, if it's applicable to you, reasons why NTD data has confused you in the past. I'll give you 5 more seconds there. And 3, 2, 1.5, 1. All right, that one's closed. And a bit of a mixture, but the predominant answer there was the middle one, that you were able to perform the query, but it was hard to understand exactly what it was showing you, or that you weren't sure if you were doing the correct query too. That's a possibility. All right, last one for now, I promise. Are you aware of how to contact FTA with suggestions or recommendations for NTD improvements? Again, do you know how to contact FTA with suggestions for improvements of the NTD? Just 5 more seconds here. Got a pretty broad distribution. For those of you who aren't aware, we're going to let you know and remind you at the end here. We've got some more stuff to go over. I'm going to skip that slide and pivot us, Tom, to 36 into 37. So we're going to switch to looking at future needs. And I'm going to turn over to Tom to first give a couple of possible data products, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So Tom, back to you.
Great, thank you, Michael. This is the fun stuff. So let's talk about the future. We're interested in identifying future needs of where the data products may head in the future for the NTD program. So, yes, no, we can go back, sorry. Great. And the first one I want to start with is geospatial. So currently, there's some geospatial data within the NTD. We have capabilities of mapping locations of NTD reporters. This actually is a service currently offered by DOT's Bureau of Transportation Statistics. And that's not FTA necessarily, but our data is used and we collect address data. Then the Bureau of Transportation Statistics uses for mapping purposes. So that's the geospatial there. The location of reportable segments. This is not as easily transformed into XY coordinates or a line, point, or polygon, but the address of the different reportable segments, this would be such as bus rapid transit route, or I guess alignment. This could be rail, and basically it provides beginning and end points and lengths. So that's one geospatial component that we already have, and that's in the reportable segments database file. And then the safety and security event locations, that actually is X and Y coordinates. That is currently reported in our SMS 40 major report. And if you go on our website, the NTD Data Products page, and go to safety and security monthly files, it's if you actually click in the website, it'll take you to Socrata, where you can get the full data set. It is a type of API, and it's hosted by Socrata. And in there, if you download the full data set, you can see actually the XY coordinates of the different safety and security events that were reported to the NTD. These are the existing capability, geospatial NTD capabilities. Next slide. I like visuals and I like maps. So here, the first one. So where are the NTD reporter locations? This is that Bureau of Transportation Statistics website. I have the URL at the bottom if you're curious and you want to explore it more. But here is the picture of the country. It has different reporter types that I believe are the different colors, but ultimately the points are one-to-one with each NTD reporter. You'll notice the concentration that largely mirrors the population of the United States, a good chunk of which is on the East Coast, some gaps in the West and mountain areas, and then on the West Coast, some concentrations around California in the San Francisco and Los Angeles area, and then other pockets around cities. So this is kind of like a visual of that first existing use. But I want to talk more about maybe expanding. So where could we go in the future? Next slide. And one additional sort of future expansion or an area that we're trying to leverage is the GTFS, or General Transit Feed Specification. Based on everyone today, it seems like most of you are savvy data users, or at least most of you are familiar or used NTD data. So hopefully GTFS 2 won't be too much a new topic for you. But just to give a refresher, the GTFS is essentially a specification of a file that defines how to store transit data related to stops, routes, and schedules. It's almost all supply data. There isn't ridership currently in the GTFS. And just to give you some feedback on how we're seeing possible uses or expansion of it, it could be used for mapping purposes in parallel with the NTD. It could be used to support web development and applications, validating or estimating vehicle revenue miles, similarly for vehicle revenue hours, and then again, validation or estimation of vehicles operating at maximum service. And again, GTFS is a kind of nationwide standard that was developed kind of as a collaboration or nationwide effort, but we're looking into how can the NTD pair with Intel stories and leverage GTFS data, and where should it head with that? And then, as I just said, the geospatial, well, where could we head with that? And with that, next slide. Michael, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Tom. I just want to do kind of a time check and reset here. We're doing well on time. The way the rest of the half hour we have remaining will play out is I'll have a couple of poll questions here regarding future needs. Then we're gonna have kind of open discussion and Q&A for as long as we can fill the time up until 3:30 Eastern. And then we'll conclude with just some couple concluding polls and some information for you about how to get in touch with us. But I say all that just to hint that, you know, we will stay on as long as there is, you know, discussion and to, you know, reason to be here. And we're, you know, but over the next few minutes, you might start to be thinking about whether you have any questions, whether you have any comments on anything that we've presented thus far today. This does essentially conclude the formal presentation part of our focus group, and it will be just polls and discussion from here on out. So we'll have time, but I know that, you know, several of you might be having a need or desire to have a lengthier chat input. So just giving you kind of that warning now that we're not running off, but if you have questions, comments, thoughts over the next few minutes, be thinking about what those may be and pop those into the chat box or the Q&A box. Because once we do get to our open discussion Q&A, again, we'll be around and we'll be answering what has come in already. But you know, if we've exhausted everything, we may conclude a little early. So we'd love to stay on as long as there is a need. But if you have any questions or comments over the next 5 minutes or so, would probably be the time to want to get those into the chat box. Before we move to that chat box and having that discussion, I do have those two quick polls. Let me just find my numbers here. Yeah, got it. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question twice. First time is going to be specific regarding geospatial, which was the first of the two future elements that Tom had mentioned as potentially being of import for the NTD. Do you have a need for this type of resource, again, specific to geospatial data? Give everyone 10 more seconds for that one. Okay, we'll close that out. And I'm going to share these results So over half of you think that a geospatial, a mapping component for the data would be useful. A few of you don't necessarily think that would be all that useful, and about a third of you aren't sure. Again, if you care to elaborate on why you're not sure or what more information you might need to determine, be happy to field that. I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to reissue the same poll, but now we're going to be talking strictly about GTFS, so the General Transit Specification Feed. So for GTFS, do you have a need for this type of resource? Maybe 10 more seconds there as well. 3, 2, similar, but a bit more so in the yes category. So that's really good for us to know that GTFS is of particular interest to this group, as is the geospatial, but a little more so on the GTFS side. Great. So let me stop sharing that poll and bring us ahead. So we have a couple slides here. We have some discussion questions. I'm just going to read these out, and then I'm actually going to bring us ahead to our kind of open discussion Q&A. But maybe some of these questions would give you some food for thought. So regarding these future needs, be thinking about, and there aren't any polls related here. Now we're strictly in discussion mode now. Wondering if there are there formats of data that would be more useful to you beyond geospatial and GTFS. We didn't mean to suggest that those are the only types of future enhancements that could be possible. We just wanted to start there because we know that those are gaining a lot of traction in the industry. But what else might be useful to you in the future by way of data or formats of data? That's the first question. Second, are there data points that would be useful to you? So specific data elements that maybe were inapplicable to you previously, but you could see them being more valuable to you in the future. You know, how is this industry shifting, and how can the NTD keep up, basically? Lastly, are there any processed data products, summaries, fact sheets that would be particularly useful for you? I suppose I could create a poll to differentiate, but we'll skip that. I do want to focus on the discussion. So I'll leave it here. So I would otherwise go to this just blank slide of open discussion and Q&A, but so that you can reference the questions, I'll leave it on this slide, and just give me a moment to take a look at the chat box to see what we can siphon off here. Great. We had a question about linking to that geospatial data map, and thanks, Matt, for providing it. Ian notes NTD being a central repository for US GTFS data would be huge. Okay, so there we go again. People are liking the GTFS possibilities and the geospatial. And Noah provided the same link, but Matt beat you to the punch. Thanks, Noah and Matt. And Sarah has an FYI that Oregon DOT is working with Oregon State University on the creation of a GTFS ride. Currently trying to work with several technology companies serving Oregon transit agencies. That's great to know, Sarah. And do come back to us and let us know how that's going. Noah notes that the URL from BTS may require you to zoom in and zoom out to get to some of the points to appear, much like Tom had displayed them. We had a series of thoughts here. Appreciate you all allowing me to kind of read some of these in real time. Tracy wanted to know, can she download agency summaries for all of our subrecipients at once? Tracy's state has 80 plus, and it's tedious to download them one at a time. So Tracy's looking for Excel and CSV formats. ZEV versus non-ZEV vehicles for rural agencies. Tom, I don't know if you can possibly answer Tracy's question about being able to download agency summaries for many subrecipients at once.
I can try to. Yeah, no, there's a lot of really good comments here. To Tracy, this is exactly why we had structured these feedback sessions as kind of thematic around user types may have similar uses. So I see your use of potentially kind of getting and aggregating, or at least I'll put it all in one place, your AD sum subrecipient reports, or maybe really their data, is similar to, it would be a very, I mean, it's similar to a large peer analysis in that you're interested maybe in not necessarily peers, but like a grouping. And so we are exploring how to almost get like paste functionality potentially into some of our data products. So for instance, if you have a list of those AD NTD IDs, we could potentially create some sort of paste filter function that would just let you kind of subset and then see just your AD agencies in the same way that maybe some folks have a grouping of 20 peers they really want to see and they already know who the peers are. And then alternatively, there's also people who just want, peers and they may not know who they are and they just want to say, I know I want to look at fleet or capital expenditures or any of these other factors. So yeah, I don't think there's a way in our data products now to do that. And we are exploring how to do that in a similar way as we are to enhance our peer analyses. So thank you for the feedback.
Great, thanks so much, Tom. And even a filter to group agencies by state would be helpful, if Tracy noted by way of follow-up. Thank you, Tracy, really appreciate that. So I think we've exhausted everything in the chat and Q&A. We're not leaving yet, but I do want to kind of give like a 2-minute warning. So if you if you're typing now and trying to get a thought in, or have any additional questions, comments, thoughts, we'll see what we get in the next couple of minutes. And if nothing, we'll proceed to our final couple of slides, and we may conclude a couple minutes early. But I will go on mute. I don't mind dead air in these instances, so I'm going to go on mute for about a full minute and see if we get anything via the chat. I'll be back with you in a minute. All right, I see we have some input already, so we're going to start to tackle those, and we'll see if anything else comes in. But once we kind of do exhaust these questions and any more that come in while we're answering them, then we'll move on to conclude to our concluding slides after that. But Ian wanted to know, is it possible to enable ad hoc querying, allowing users to select relevant fields and applying their own filters across the entire NTD data set? And Tom, I know there's some customization that's available, but I think I see a theme emerging about people wanting to slice and dice the data in more manners. Did you have anything to add from your prior answer that would be useful for Ian at this point?
No, I agree. I think we're actively figuring out how to kind of allow customization. And so just rereading Ian's question, yeah, I think creating like particular filters or custom filters and dimensionality, and yeah, you use the word querying. It's hard to balance, I guess, with Ian. Are you using advanced tools such as like APIs, application programming interfaces with like a toolkit like R or Python? In some other sessions, I guess it's like we can pre-build them into files or dashboards, or you can create those sorts of custom scripts or algorithms, and it's really about which should it be. If we try to create them ourselves, it's going to be a finite list, and we're actively figuring out do we have the right ones. Or are you asking more about, are you using Python or R, and you actually want like an API key, and these are really technically, but you get an API key, and then you're actually trying to get like a GET request, and then kind of pull in the raw mutable data, and then kind of create the dimensionality yourself, I guess. Let's see. But think about that, I guess, Ian. And the other thing is there's an interesting data table called Group Plan Sponsor Tool. So in some sense, we did create a custom data product with dimensionality for, this is mainly around assets, but group plans sponsors. So we've started doing this, and it's slow, and we can't accommodate everyone, but we do, I think, need to know where there's critical mass for a need for a certain data product. So, now's the time. So if everyone wants, I would take a look at the group plan sponsor data table and see if it meets your needs in terms of if we did that for like a state or some other subrecipient sort of like sponsor or aggregation level, would that meet your needs? And you can find that data table in the same spot we went to. It's that main website. And just look for it's called the group planning sponsor tool, knowing that we'd have to create one specific for different groupings of agencies, but it could something like that could work in the future. I'm not sure if that's what everyone's picturing.
Great, thanks, Tom. And there seems to be critical mass for desire for APIs, yeah, and GTFS. That's great. I did want to come back to Tracy's question. I really appreciate this question, Tracy, because I think we buried the lead with that poll question earlier. So Tracy's wondering, or noting that the NTD data takes so long to release. Is there a way to speed that up? It's stale by the time we get it, and of course we had the poll about the 6-week lag. So we certainly know that is lengthy and too lengthy for at least some of you, as the poll indicated. But I do know that there are efforts underway at FTA to see about reducing that lag a little bit. Tom, did you want to elaborate a little bit on what's kind of in the hopper there?
Yeah, I think that's great. So Tracy, thank you for your inquiry. So, and that's, I got ahead of that a little bit because I presented on our monthly data products. So I don't know if this is true. I think you're referencing sort of like the annual data products that have like financial data and that really complex granularity of data. That is true. We are
right. Annual data is what Tracy's interested in. Yeah.
Exactly. The annual data is an interesting one because we have different reporters that have different fiscal years, and so the year actually accommodates the latest one. So it's not a savory answer, but it's funny. I'm getting some inquiries or questions or comments saying, what you're collecting now is almost like too burdensome. And so we've created these sort of different timelines for different agencies and different reports and forms with different levels of sort of rigorousness to try to accommodate everyone. But that accommodation comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of, if we want to create a consistent data set, you really have to wait until everyone is in and then put together that national snapshot. So all that is to say, I'll put it this way. Let's say we expanded the monthly module to collect more, maybe a little bit of financial or some other data. I know that we would get adverse comments saying that, or at least I anticipate that people would say, I don't have that, or it's too burdensome. We have a lot of comments already asking us about why we need to collect certain data points even once a year. So doing it more frequently, we're doing the best we can to balance. But that being said, there's a use case. That's really why we're having this session. It's like sometimes we speculate and we don't even necessarily know all or any of the uses that our core users are using our data for. So knowing precisely, I guess, which data points you need and why you need it more frequently would be helpful. I agree, though, we're looking at, is the data too stale, and what's the burden if we collect it more frequently? How do you accommodate all these different fiscal years? All of that is in play when we kind of make the different structures around NTD reporting.
Great, thanks, Tom. And Catherine brought up a good point that a 4-week lag would at least align with the NPM RDS, which has 1 month, which also has kind of a 4-week lag, one month late releases. So that is good to know and something to at least be striving towards by way of reduction. So that does exhaust the chats we have. So we're going to move towards conclusion. We're going to first remind you or let you know that to provide us additional feedback, you can feel free to email ntdfeedback@fta.gov. That email address will be available for at least the next week plus. This is specific. The email address was set up specific for feedback for this trio of focus groups, but that doesn't mean there aren't other ways of getting in touch with FTA thereafter. But any feedback specific on this webinar or anything that's kind of percolating, that email address will be available to you for the next little while. I have two quick concluding polls, and then I'll turn it back to Tom to kind of wrap us up. But let me get these last couple polls. Just two polls here, and then we'll be done with the polls. So what was your level of understanding of NTD data before today's feedback session? Did you have no understanding, minimal, advanced, moderate? And I think I got the ordering mixed up there. So do take a close look at those answer choices. So no understanding, minimal, advanced, moderate, or expert level. That's before today. Give you about 5 more seconds. And a very distributed series of responses there. Literally half of you have that moderate level. We have an expert in the audience. That's great. You can teach our courses for us. A few of you are advanced, and several of you, minimal to no understanding. But again, happy to have you, and thanks again for joining us. And that was before, so maybe, hopefully, you didn't go down at all. But we are curious, of course, as you might expect. What is your level of understanding of NTD data after today's feedback session? Maybe you're still where you were. Hopefully you didn't go down a level, but if you did, that's fine. Maybe this was too much and now you're even more confused. That's totally fair enough. So give you about 10 seconds here. Again, now having participated, so after today's feedback session, what is your level of understanding? Good, and I see some of you have moved up. Let's wait 5 more seconds. Our expert is still an expert. But a few of you have moved from a moderate to advanced, and a few of you from very minimal to moderate. So I'm going to close that out. And with that, Tom, let me turn it back over to you to kind of reel us in here.
Sounds great. Thank you, Michael. I'll save you all a few minutes. Thank you so much for attending this webinar session. Hopefully it was something a little different. It was interactive. You got a chance to interact with each other, with us, learn a little bit about the NTD, and also give us some feedback on trajectory of where and what sorts of things we should be focusing on when we make data product improvements in the future or even new data products. And thank you so much to the National Transit Institute and TI. We'll be recording this and publishing this session online. 2 others are already recorded and published online, so you can watch those if you'd like. It should be available in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure exactly when, but feel free to watch those others. In the meantime, they're already on there. And again, that email address, if you want to send us private feedback, if you want to analyze some of the data sets and give us a more thorough response, we welcome that. And to anyone who asked questions we weren't able to get to today in detail, we will try to follow up with you. If not, just email this email address and we'll make sure to get back to you. And with that, I think that's everything. Lori, any other closing remarks?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone participating. Thank you, Tom and Michael, for the presentation. Thank you, Noah, for working the back end of things with me. Everyone should be receiving an email with a link to do a brief evaluation. If you could just take a few minutes and complete that, we would really appreciate it. Other than that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and a little early, but enjoy your Thanksgiving. We're almost there.